This week, we're going to take a look at the running backs in the league and where I think our starting running back, Cam Akers, lines up against them in terms of rankings. Last week, we talked about quarterbacks and we had different tiers. We called them trucks and trailers. Quarterback is the single most important position in pro sports, and so I think of them a little bit differently than I think of running backs. With running backs and with the other positions that we talk about individual players, we're going to just talk about the all pro, the all world level players, the elite players, and then really good, good, and above average. Then we're not going to talk about any average players after that. There are three running backs that I think fall into that all world level, and for different reasons. I think that Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, and Austin Eckler are just a cut above the rest. Eckler might surprise some being in that list, but I think he gives you about 85 to 90% of what Christian McCaffrey does at a much higher availability rate, which is why you see him here instead of Christian McCaffrey. In the elite tier, right below that, we've got the NFL's rushing leader, Josh Jacobs, aforementioned Christian McCaffrey, and Jonathan Taylor. Josh Jacobs is very good with the ball in his hands. He's hard to bring down, but he doesn't have a great history of catching the ball. Christian McCaffrey doesn't have a great history of staying healthy. And then Jonathan Taylor, while he did just lead the league in rushing 2 years ago, he had a disappointing campaign last season. However, I do think having Anthony Richardson in the backfield with him is going to drastically improve his outlooks, as defenses can't just hone in on stopping him. In the really good category, rounding out the top 10, we've got Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon, Saquon Barkley, and Dalvin Cook. I'll be interested to see Aaron Jones kind of in that reverse situation as Jonathan Taylor, as now I think defenses are going to be keying on him now that Jordan Love is at the helm in Green Bay instead of Aaron Rodgers. Joe Mixon, I've got a little bit higher than some. I think that he is very, very consistent, and that is one of his calling cards. Not only is he a very talented runner, he is very consistent and consistently available. Maybe has taken a step off talent-wise compared to where he once was, but is still a very high-level runner. Saquon Barkley is kind of a mini Christian McCaffrey, I think, in many ways, even to the point where they both had some trouble staying healthy for the majority of their careers. I think Barkley is a little more powerful, whereas McCaffrey is a little bit more elusive, but very dynamic with the ball in their hands, also very injury-prone throughout their careers. I'll be very interested with Dalvin Cook to see where he winds up. He carried the load in Minnesota for the majority of his career, also had some trouble staying healthy, but you wouldn't know it based on his season-long totals. Hopefully he can get into an offense where he's not the focal point, and that will hopefully help him stay healthier. So that's the top 10. I have a special tier just outside the top 10. It's for one player only, and that is Bijan Robinson. Now, I think that Bijan Robinson is going to enter the league, and he's going to be a top 10 running back, if not a top 7, 6, 5 running back in the league very quickly. I would take him over any running back that we haven't mentioned yet. If we're looking at for years to come, probably take him over most of the running backs on the list that we've mentioned already. But rounding out the rest of the top 20, we've got Tony Pollard. I'm very excited to see what he can do finally as the lead back in Dallas. Long overdue. Breece Hall, very interested in his sophomore campaign coming off that ACL. Alvin Kamara, Dameon Pierce, Isaiah Pacheco. I've got Ramondre Stevenson a little bit lower than a lot of people do. I think that New England backfield is always crowded. I believe they picked up James Robinson from Jacksonville, and from the Jets, I think, is where he got shipped off to in the middle of last season. So it's always crowded there in New England. Travis Etienne could definitely be losing some carries to Tank Bigsby on early downs and on goal line downs, short yardage downs, but super talented nonetheless. Kenneth Walker, couldn't believe Seattle already spent another second-round pick on a running back. I thought their backup DJ Dallas is more than good enough to spell Walker a little bit. Then we've got DeAndre Swift there, rounding out the good category. Definitely would be a lot higher if it weren't for injury concerns with him. Rounding out the top 25, we've got the above average players, players that I think still provide some value to their team above an average player that are worth mentioning. We've got Javonte Williams coming off a torn ACL. Najee Harris has definitely been more of a volume producer. Tyler Algier, Kareem Hunt, and J.K. Dobbins. So now that we've got the context, where do I see Cam Akers fitting into this list? That's a really hard question because we got two very different versions of Cam Akers last year where we didn't even know if he was going to be on the team at this point in the offseason. And then we got December Cam Akers, who lit the world on fire and was a top five running back to close out the season. I'm optimistic that with a rejuvenated offensive line that he will be able to carry what he took in December, but I think that there's one point that is being severely undermentioned by the media in terms of Cam Akers' development for 2023, and that is the loss of Thomas Brown. It's well documented how highly thought of Thomas Brown was to the Rams organization and around the league to the point where he was stolen away to be an offensive coordinator for Frank Reich in Carolina. And I say that it's a significant loss because everything he touched in Los Angeles turned to gold. He was the running backs coach for some time, but was having a difficult transition to getting from running backs to where he wanted to be as offensive coordinator. So he was moved to the tight ends, which is a very important position because tight ends have to know everything. They've got to know all the blocking schemes. They've got to know all the routes. They've got to know everything. So Thomas Brown was moved to tight ends. Rashad Samples was brought in to coach the running backs. Well, Rashad Samples left in the middle of the season to go back to the college level. In that emergency situation, Thomas Brown was moved back to the running backs coach, and that's when Cam Akers really took off. It was that last 4, 5, 6 weeks of the season, and what else happened then is Tyler Higbee kind of disappeared to finish the season. So we have a really big catch-22 here of, yes, we have a rejuvenated offensive line. Akers did a lot of what he did with 3 starters on the offensive line that weren't even on the roster at the end of the preseason. So there's a lot to be said for that, and there's a lot that has been said about that and his development. We're hearing tons of great things coming out of training camp about him, but I think one thing that's not getting mentioned enough is the loss of Thomas Brown and the effect that that might have on him. Overall, with our 2023 outlook, I've kind of put together the average of the 2 potential outcomes, and I would slot him right behind Kenneth Walker in the good tier. So everybody that's higher on the list, I would prefer to have. However, I do think there is a decent likelihood that Cam Akers has a better season than most people, especially in this good category, if he can channel that December Cam Akers. I would love to be proven wrong about putting him just at the back end of the top 20 here, but given our offense and what we need in a running back, somebody who can consistently get 4 yards and then bust an explosive run every now and then, I'd rather have quite a few guys that are higher on this list than Akers. Let me know in the comments down below what you think, and next week we will talk about our wide receivers.